On the morning of December 17, 2024, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov walked out of an apartment block on Ryazansky Prospect in southeastern Moscow, roughly 7 kilometers from the Kremlin. He was the head of Russia's radiological, chemical and biological defense forces, one of the most senior officers in the entire Russian military, standing in the heart of the best protected capital in the country. An electric scooter was parked near the entrance. As Kirillov and his assistant passed it, the scooter exploded. Russian state media later estimated the device carried around 300 grams of TNT equivalent, enough to shatter windows in the building across the street. Both men were killed instantly. Within hours, a source inside Ukraine's security service, the SBU, confirmed to multiple Western outlets that this had been their operation, carried out one day after Ukrainian prosecutors had formally charged Kirillov with overseeing the use of banned chemical weapons. Now think about what that actually means. For years, Russia told its own people and the world that its heartland was untouchable. The war in Ukraine was something happening far away, on someone else's soil, and Russia was fully in control and winning. And yet, here was one of its top generals killed by a bomb on a scooter just a few minutes' drive from Red Square. But whether you call this a murder or an assassination, it was the visible tip of something built quietly and patiently over more than a decade. Let's walk through how Ukraine's intelligence services went from a broken, infiltrated, half-collapsed wreck in 2014 into one of the most feared covert forces on the planet, and show the role the CIA played in building it. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to 2014, when Russia seized Crimea and lit the fuse on the war in the Donbass. Ukraine's security services weren't just weak, they were compromised from the inside out. In fact, the SBU headquarters in Luhansk, which is in Donbass itself, was stormed in April 2014 during the prelude to the war in the Donbass. One analysis from Marek Szywiaczek, a Polish internal security agency officer and a specialist on Russian Secret Service operations, suggests that the SBU was in fact already penetrated by the Russian Secret Services. The bare facts of that day are not in dispute. On April 6, 2014, a crowd surged toward the regional SBU building, and by the time it was over, the headquarters had fallen and its armory was empty. An entire stockpile of military-grade rifles, grenades and explosives vanished, which was enough to help arm the insurrection that was about to engulf the Donbass and trigger the war. And the manner in which the building fell is peculiar. The officers inside, including men from the elite Alpha unit, had been ordered to give up even their service pistols. The weapons store was secured with dummy mines. A nearby garrison of 12,000 troops sent no reinforcements, and the detainees who had been arrested the night before were released back into the crowd, where they promptly helped lead the assault. Taken one at a time, each of these could be written off as panic or incompetence. Taken together, the Polish analysts argued that the building was actually open from the inside. His case is that Russia didn't need to recruit individual officers when it could lean on the local politicians who controlled them, the party of region's patrons whose networks ran through the police, the administration, and the security service itself. But even this was actually coincidental. The supporting evidence for just how weak the SBU was at the time was the testimony of the man who took over it after the revolution, Valentin Nalyvaichenko. He said he inherited a service that was hollowed out, its previous leadership having fled to Russia or Crimea, with no operative files and no weapons left behind. He's described the agency as heavily infiltrated by Russia's FSB, and he claimed to be the first SBU chief who actually began detaining FSB officers inside Ukraine. None of that proves what happened in Luhansk, but it tells you the soil was right for it. When the man who ran the service says it was rotten with Russian agents, the question of whether one of its outposts was handed over rather than lost stops being a conspiracy theory and becomes a reasonable thing to ask. So that's the wreck Ukraine started from. The country could be absorbed back into Russia's orbit, with the heirs of the KGB running the show, or it could try to build genuinely democratic, Western-facing services out of the rubble. Kyiv chose the second path. The man who became central to that rebuild was Valery Kondratyuk, who worked first inside the SBU and later took over the HUR, Ukraine's military intelligence service. In 2015, according to investigations by the Washington Post and the New York Times, the CIA helped support the creation of a new specialized SBU unit called the 5th Directorate. which combined counterintelligence with special operations. That unit began building networks of agents inside occupied territory, running surveillance, and carrying out some of Ukraine's earliest covert actions against Russian proxy forces. But none of this was a given, and the Americans were deeply wary, for good reason. They knew Ukrainian intelligence was riddled with Russian sources, and they worried that anything they shared would land on a desk in Moscow within days. So Kondratyuk decided not to leave it up to chance. He handed over a stack of top-secret Russian military documents, essentially as a gift, to prove that Ukraine had access worth having and the discipline to protect it. Former CIA operations officer Ed Bogan, who spoke to journalist David Kirichenko for Forbes, described the Ukrainian mindset in those years as something close to what Americans felt after 9/11. But Ukrainian officers had to overcome decades of Soviet-era mistrust before the Americans would open up. And when one side consistently delivers useful, accurate information and proves it can keep a secret, the other side starts to share more in return. So for years, the Ukrainians delivered. And here's the part that's important for the story here. Ukraine wasn't simply a charity case receiving American help. Many Ukrainians speak Russian as a native language, and the languages themselves are closely related. Many also have family, friends, and an intimate cultural knowledge of the country they were now fighting. So Ukraine understood Russia in a way no Western service ever could, and that allowed it to gather intelligence to generate for the CIA. In turn, the CIA was getting an extraordinary window into the Russian military and its decision-making. The notable contributions were intercepted material that helped establish Russian involvement in the 2014 downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over eastern Ukraine and pursuing the Russian operatives behind interference in the 2016 US election. So by the eve of the full-scale invasion in 2022, the cooperation had reportedly expanded to include around a dozen secret forward bases strung along Ukraine's border with Russia, built and equipped with CIA support, from which Ukrainian officers tracked Russian troop movements and ran their own networks. By one account, the Ukrainians were generating more intelligence on Russia than the Americans could fully process in CIA's Kyiv station. The two services also began running joint operations together in other parts of the world, which in the intelligence trade is the highest expression of trust there is. Out of this period came a new generation of officers, one that was made completely detached from Ukraine's past in the Soviet Union and made entirely from people born in independent Ukraine. By far the most important of them was Kirillov Budanov. The New York Times reported in February 2024 that Budanov served in Unit 2245, an elite military intelligence formation that worked closely with the CIA after 2015. Its speciality was recovering Russian military hardware, communications gear, and other equipment that could be torn apart and studied by both Ukrainian and American analysts. Budanov would go on to lead HUR, and the officers trained in those years now sit at the top of nearly every Ukrainian intelligence and security organization. They became the architects of the campaigns we're about to walk you through. Now, one feature of that system is that Ukraine runs two major services that openly compete with each other. There's the HUR, the Military Intelligence Directorate, focused largely abroad, and the SBU, the Domestic Security Service. The competition between domestic and foreign intelligence and covert operations pushes both services to be better and to deliver results. Whether or not you accept that framing, the so-called rivalry has produced an extraordinary run of operations. And nowhere has that race been more visible than at sea. But before we get there, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show to watch all the military specifics of the operations we're about to mention and keep in touch with all the news in the war in Ukraine and global geopolitics. Now, when Russia invaded in 2022, Ukraine had almost no navy to speak of. It had lost most of its fleet when Russia took Crimea in 2014, and it scuttled its own flagship frigate in the opening days of the war to keep it out of Russian hands. On paper, Russia owned the Black Sea. Its fleet blockaded Ukrainian ports, choking off grain exports that fed people from North Africa to the Middle East, and it launched cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities. But in April 2022, the cruiser Moskva, the flagship of the entire Black Sea fleet, caught fire and sank. Ukraine had hit it with two domestically built Neptune anti-ship missiles. While it's important to underscore the success of Ukraine's military forces here, it's the intelligence services from the US who flagged Moskva's location and Ukraine services who acted on the information. The Moskva became the first Russian flagship lost in combat since the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, and losing it forced Russia to pull its ships back and play it safe. This created a new problem for Ukraine, which was then solved by the naval drone, and this is where Ukrainian improvisation became genuinely revolutionary. The SBU developed a sea drone called the Sea Baby, built early on from the parts of jet skis and motorboats and off-the-shelf electronics. In line with the rivalry, HUR developed the Magura drone to continue operations that would target Russian ports, chiefly in Crimea. These machines were small, fast, low to the water, hard to spot, and packed with explosives, and they could be controlled from hundreds of kilometers away using satellite links. In effect, two rival Ukrainian agencies had each built a robot navy from scratch. In February 2024, a swarm of Magura V5 drones sank a missile corvette near Crimea. 2 weeks later, they sank the landing ship Cesar Kunikov. In March, they sank the patrol ship Sergei Kotov, a vessel Ukraine valued at around $65 million, destroyed by drones that cost a tiny fraction of that. By various Western estimates, by March 2024, Ukraine had sunk or disabled roughly a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet and forced the rest to relocate east to Novorossiysk, hundreds of kilometers from Crimea, too far away to threaten Ukrainian shipping or defend the peninsula they were supposed to be protecting. The same campaign, alongside repeated SBU operations, battered the Kerch Bridge, the symbolic and logistical link between Russia and occupied Crimea that Putin had personally driven a truck across to open in 2018. Then the drone started doing things no one had ever done before. On the last day of 2024, a Magura drone fired a modified heat-seeking missile and shot down 2 Russian Mi-8 helicopters off the coast of Crimea. That was the first time in history a naval drone had destroyed a military aircraft. The following spring, an upgraded Magura V7 carrying American-made Sidewinder missiles shot down 2 Russian Su-30 fighter jets over the Black Sea, according to Ukrainian officials. But that's only a part of how Ukraine's intelligence services directly helped in the war effort. For the bigger picture, we need to return to dry land and to the campaign that Kirillov's death was part of. That death was a small line in a long ledger, and some of the earlier strikes were never officially claimed. In August 2022, a car bomb near Moscow killed Daria Dugina, the daughter of a prominent Russian nationalist ideologue. American intelligence officials later assessed that elements of the Ukrainian government were behind it, which Ukraine denied. In the spring of 2023, a bomb hidden inside a statuette killed the prominent Russian war blogger known as Vladlen Tartarsky in a St. Petersburg cafe. Russia initially blamed Ukraine and found a Russian political activist who actually delivered the statuette. As it would turn out from Ukraine's own reporting a year later, the entire operation was fully orchestrated by Ukraine's secret services, and the Russian activist was used as the most expendable piece of the puzzle, further degrading the influence and prestige of Russian services. The event also showcased just how cutthroat the operations became, using Russian people in operations against the Russian government with 42 casualties, in an effort to remove prominent military strategists, analysts, and anyone close to Putin. And as the war ground on, that pace quickened, and the targets climbed higher up the chain of command. In April 2025, a car bomb in Balashishka, just east of Moscow, killed Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moshkalik, a deputy head of the main operational directorate of the Russian General Staff, who once sat at the Normandy format ceasefire talks. Days later, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he'd received a report from Ukraine's foreign intelligence chief on the liquidation of senior Russian figures, adding that justice inevitably comes, though he didn't name Moshkalik directly. In December 2025, another car bomb in Moscow killed Lieutenant General Fanil Savarov. And in June 2026, an artillery commander named Damir Davidov was killed in that same Balashishka neighborhood, less than a kilometer from where Moshkalik died. You might ask what all of this actually achieves militarily. Killing one general does not win a war, and that's a fair assessment. Ukraine has argued that the value here is partly psychological, both for Ukrainians who see war criminals being held to account, and for a Western audience learning that Ukraine's reach goes further than anyone had credited. But there's a colder logic too. Each of these killings tell every Russian officer that a uniform and a desk in Moscow aren't a safe place from which to plan a war against Ukraine. It forces Russia's security services to spend enormous resources looking inward, guarding their own and hunting for leaks, instead of focusing entirely on the front. But Ukraine's secret services also set the conditions for Ukraine's biggest battlefield surprises. The networks of agents that the 5th Directorate and the HUR built inside occupied territory fed targeting information back to Ukrainian forces, allowing precise long-range strikes with sophisticated drones and newly developed missiles. And when Ukraine stunned the world in August 2024 by pushing across the border into Kursk, the first siege of Russian soil by a foreign army since the Second World War, it was the reconnaissance of these services that underscored the operational deficiencies in the region. The covert war and the conventional war enabled one another, because every time Ukraine would capitalize on intelligence, it could push the front line just a bit farther, unnerve Russian services, and allow its own operatives to get more intel for the next push. All of this came together at the start of June 2025 in the now famous Operation Spiderweb. In what was revealed to be an 18-month effort, Ukrainian operatives had been smuggling drones and launch equipment into Russia and concealing them inside wooden cabins, built to look like ordinary prefabricated homes mounted on trucks. On the day of the attack, the cabin roofs slid open at staging points near several Russian air bases. One of the targets was the Belaya in eastern Siberia, which is more than 4,000 kilometers from Ukraine. The drones poured in droves and damaged Tu-95 and Tu-22 M3 bombers, which Russia had been using to rain cruise missiles on Ukrainian cities and which were one of the few options that could carry nuclear missiles. Ukraine's SBU initially said it had hit 41 aircraft, taking out around a third of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers, and that the damage came to around $7 billion. The defense intelligence firm Janes used satellite imagery to assess that the strike destroyed around 12 aircraft and damaged several more. A senior NATO official split the difference at roughly 10 to 13 aircraft destroyed, with around 40 damaged in total, and estimated the operation knocked out a fifth of Russia's operational long-range aviation. Whichever number you take, the key is that Russia doesn't actually build these bombers anymore, so every loss was permanent and directly hurt Russia's ability to project power. And the final campaign that the secret services undertook was against Russia's economy, and it's here where CIA's fingerprints reappear. A New York Times investigation reported that CIA officers and American military planners helped Ukraine refine its long-range campaign against Russia's energy sector. Rather than hitting refineries at random, the planning reportedly focused on the components that are hardest and slowest to replace. In one case, described in that reporting, a CIA expert identified a specific refinery coupler whose destruction could leave a facility offline for weeks. The same logic was applied to Russia's so-called shadow fleet, the aging tankers Moscow uses to move sanctioned oil around the world and keep the cash flowing into its war. The CIA was authorized to support elements of that effort as well. What began in 2014 as help rebuilding a broken spy service had evolved a decade later into a joint campaign to strangle the financial lifeblood of the Russian war machine. And the broader political angle here is just as important. After the public clash between President Donald Trump and President Zelensky in February 2025, Washington temporarily suspended intelligence cooperation with Kyiv, and publicly, it looked like this was it for the CIA-SBU partnership. But the pause proved short-lived. Intelligence sharing was restored in March 2025, allowing the CIA and Ukraine's intelligence services to resume their close cooperation. The reason is simple. For as much as Ukraine depended on the CIA for support, the CIA also benefited from having Ukrainian operatives lodged deep inside Russia. Ukraine understands Russia in ways Western intelligence services can't easily replicate, making it a vital partner in intelligence operations not only on Ukrainian and Russian soil, but anywhere Moscow projects influence, including the Middle East. So how does this factor into the broader war? Putin's rule hinges on the story that Russia has much sharper claws than Ukraine, and that it would inevitably win the invasion, and that the underlying secret services from Russia could infiltrate Ukraine and keep it imbalanced, towing the line toward Russia's geopolitical sphere of influence. But while that might have been true in the pre-2014 era, the past decade saw a reversal of the balance in favor of Ukraine. And as Ukraine's spy masters came out of the shadows, they showed the world that nowhere in Russia was ever truly untouchable. Perhaps one day, those same spy masters would be responsible for Putin's downfall, as he's starting to lose popular support from the very same people he helped usher to the top of the government. To learn more, check out this video, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all the developments in the war in Ukraine and global geopolitics.